While everyone is discussing Donald Trump's loud statements about the Russian dictator Putin, the United States Senate has made a very important decision regarding Ukraine. There will now be more aid. The United States Congress has finally made an important decision to increase military aid to Ukraine, which was previously opposed by United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. The Senate Armed Services Committee approved allocating $500 million to Ukraine in the 2026 budget. Well, even though the amount itself may seem small, what's important is not the sum, but what is additionally included in this bill. After all, everyone is talking about the money right now. I dug a little deeper, examined this bill more thoroughly, and it turned out that there are a lot of interesting perks for Ukraine in it. In particular, the bill will require the Pentagon to continue providing intelligence to Ukraine, ensure the sale of weapons for Ukraine to Europe from the United States, and solidify the policy of increasing military aid from the United States. And this bill also directly prohibits Donald Trump from reducing the United States military presence in Europe. And that's not all. That's why we'll talk more about this Senate decision in this episode. I'm Alexei Pechi. It's July 12th. Let's go through it step by step. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. So, it became known yesterday that the United States Senate Armed Services Committee approved security assistance for Ukraine in the amount of 500 million United States dollars. As part of its project, the wording is for the National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year 2026. Let me pause here and explain a little so I don't speak in bureaucratic language. The National Defense Authorization Act is an annual political, I emphasize political bill that authorizes funding levels and grants authority to the United States military. It ensures that American forces have the necessary resources to carry out their missions around the world. And American weapons manufacturers closely monitor it, because a lot of funding is allocated there specifically for the United States government to purchase those very weapons, often from private companies. Interestingly, earlier, on June 11th, United States Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth shocked many by stating that United States spending on the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative would be reduced or even cancelled altogether. We're talking about those very $500 million. And here I'll quote Pete Hegseth from June 11th, which is exactly a month ago. The current administration of Donald Trump has a completely different view on the conflict in Ukraine. We believe that a peaceful settlement through negotiations is in the best interests of both sides and in the interests of our country, especially considering all the competing interests around the world. And then Pete Hegseth said that we would even cut those conditional $500 million from the United States budget for aid to Ukraine. But the United States Senate Committee decided otherwise, and this aid is still included. And here it's important to explain another very important point. Some Ukrainian media outlets misinterpreted this message, saying that the United States Senate is already allocating $500 million to Ukraine. But no, that's not quite the case. The decision was made by the Senate Armed Services Committee, which voted for its own draft of the National Defense Authorization Act for 2026, which regulates the spending of certain defense programs. And in this draft, it is proposed to allocate $500 million for Ukraine under the program. Right here. Don't confuse it with the program, because these are different programs. This one is humanitarian, while this one is military. The decision was made by an absolute majority of the committee, but it's important to understand that the committee makes the decision and then proposes that the Senate consider this decision. That is, there is still no decision from the entire Senate on this issue. But still, there are a few key shifts here. On the one hand, the annual basic aid to Ukraine in the amount of $300 million has been allocated since, if I'm not mistaken, the time when Donald Trump first delivered those very javelins to Ukraine, precisely for this money, under this program. And these $300 million were included in the United States budget every year during the full-scale Russian invasion as a kind of guaranteed aid. This was the foundation on which the rest of the aid packages to Ukraine, worth billions and billions of dollars, were later voted on. This is primarily a political decision that highlights the stance of the United States rather than focusing on the specific amount. You need to understand here, so you aren't alarmed by the fact that it's only $500 million. On the other hand, the relevant committee of the United States Senate is, for the first time, proposing to raise the amount to $500 million instead of $300 million. That's the first point. The second point, exactly a month ago, as we already discussed, Pete Hegseth was threatening to cut even those meager $300 million from the budget. If that had happened, the issue wouldn't be about the $300 million. That would have reflected a general shift in the United States political stance on supporting Ukraine. And now the relevant Senate committee is telling Pete Hegseth directly, we're not just refusing to cut this aid like you wanted, we're actually increasing it. And you, the United States Secretary of Defense, can't change that. So don't get involved in political matters. Focus on defense and we'll handle the politics as senators. Once again, even these $500 million by themselves, of course, won't make a big difference. It's more of a symbolic step, which shows that support for Ukraine in the Senate hasn't dried up. In fact, it's growing. In short, we've figured this out. It's a political move and, importantly, a foundation for further decisions. But here there are two caveats. First, the bill has to pass a vote in the Senate. So far, it has only been approved by the relevant committee. But there shouldn't be any problems with this since it's the committee's job to do its work. Typically, this decision is simply adopted in the chamber later, especially since the Armed Forces Committee is quite large. There are 27 votes out of all 100 senators, and 26 voted for this decision, only one was against. And secondly, but in the House of Representatives, an alternative bill is being proposed, and there they are also suggesting to allocate the same $300 million in aid to Ukraine. Which is also good because, again, Pete Hegseth was going to cut them. But it's important to understand that the alternative bill is more of a disagreement from the Democrats and an attempt to push through their own solution. Like, listen, it's us, the Democrats, not the Republicans, who want to continue helping Ukraine. This is purely a political move. And now that we've covered the basics, let's move on to the most interesting part. If Congress votes for this particular committee bill and Trump signs it, it will be a huge victory for Ukraine. I didn't mention at the start that it's not about money without a reason. The thing is, the bill prohibits the United States of America, for example, from reducing its military presence in Europe. And there are also a few very important subpoints that appear there. In other words, this bill will completely eliminate all the threats made by Donald Trump and his team to withdraw troops from Europe. But for Ukraine, there are actually a lot of pleasant moments here. First, the United States Senate is requiring the Pentagon to develop a clear plan for maintaining the military equipment supplied to Ukraine, meaning they are committing to repairing the weapons that have already been delivered to Ukraine. Second, the bill requires the Pentagon to report on the initiative that allows Europe to purchase weapons for Ukraine through the program. And this is one of the main points. Why? Because it will allow Europe and Trump to implement a scheme in which Europe buys weapons from the United States and then transfers them to Ukraine. And the Pentagon will not only have to facilitate this, but also report to Congress on the implementation of this program once a quarter. Third, the bill establishes United States policy on Ukraine. The United States of America must support and strengthen Ukraine's defense capabilities and help build an army capable of deterring future aggression. And fourth, the bill requires the Pentagon to continue providing Ukraine with intelligence data, including satellite data. And importantly, to punish the Pentagon if Pete Hegseth again decides to suspend intelligence sharing with Ukraine. In general, if this bill is passed and Trump signs it, Ukraine will receive a powerful foundation for further support from the United States, at least until the 2026 fiscal year. And this will emphasize that United States policy is absolutely not what many thought in the first months of Donald Trump's presidency. I'll keep my fingers crossed and leave it there. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like.